Russian President Vladimir Putin setting his sights on the Asia-Pacific as Moscow's relations with the West sink to fresh lows. In a fiery speech, the leader hailed the region's growing global influence and warned that it's impossible for the world to isolate Russia. Mr. Putin spoke at the Eastern Economic Forum in the port city of Vladivostok. He argued that the West was failing while Asia was the future. And he insisted that Russia has gained, not lost, from its war in Ukraine.
Несмотря на это, западные страны стремятся сохранить прежний, выгодный только им мировой порядок. Заставить всех жить по пресловутым правилам, которые сами же выдумали, сами и регулярно нарушают, постоянно эти правила меняют под себя в зависимости от складывающейся текущей конъюнктуры.
President Putin set to meet China's Xi Jinping for the first time since Russia invaded Ukraine. The pair will hold face-to-face talks next week on the sidelines of a regional summit in Uzbekistan. Their partnership is a pushback against US-led alliances. This would be President Xi's first known trip abroad since the start of the pandemic more than 2 years ago. China's foreign ministry has yet to confirm this meeting. Beijing and Moscow have grown closer since the start of the war in Ukraine. In February, both leaders announced a no-limit strategic partnership shortly before Russia launched its offensive, something, though, China has yet to condemn. Stuart Smith joins us live from Moscow. Stuart, President Putin confirming this pivot towards Asia. The timing of this at this forum in Vladivostok and ahead of the next week's forum in Uzbekistan, what's the significance of it?
Well, it would be wrong to say that Russia hasn't been looking to Asia for over a decade now as a way to develop its economy. What's new now and made very clear in the speech by the Russian president earlier is that the importance of pushing east is now greater than it ever has been, with Western economies for Russia falling rapidly away and quickly becoming no longer in the future its main source of income. The Russian president said that irreversible changes have taken place in the entire system of international relations, that the world is becoming one which is more polar. And interestingly, he suggested that with that increased polarity, it's ultimately beneficial for Russia. He said that provides a reason for everything unnecessary and harmful, everything preventing Russia from moving forward, to be rejected. And he implied in his speech the solution for Russia is to look east to Asia. Now, at the Eastern Economic Forum over the past few days this week, we've heard numerous examples of how that may manifest. For example, new trade routes being developed between, say, for example, Vladivostok in Russia and Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, direct shipping routes, while other ones are no longer available to Russia. Also, Russia says it's looking at switching to conducting trade in mutual currency. So, for example, the Vietnamese dong and the Indonesian rupiah instead of the US dollar and euro, as is so common in international transactions. That would enable Russia to not have to rely on its now sanctioned international reserves so much. And one finer example is with the ASEAN countries looking to double their import of energy by 2040, Russia sees a place for itself there by being that provider. It's not something that seems possible in the short term, with liquefied natural gas supplies coming from Russia very difficult due to a lack of capacity. But Russia definitely seeing potentially Southeast Asia as where it could send its energy instead of Europe.
Stuart, you mentioned this, what one would imagine, a fall-off in revenue because of sanctions from the West. But Mr. Putin has said despite what he calls the West sanctions fever, his country's economy has coped well.
Yes, interesting. He said cope. Certainly at the beginning of the so-called special military operation in Russia, it was first talked about amongst high-ranking politicians as something that wouldn't affect Russia at all. Now, the line seems to be coping with sanctions. Indeed, he said that financial, economic and technical aggression from the West is being countered, and that Russia is relying successfully on its own industries, notably natural resources, for making up the difference. But this comes the same week as an internal economic report, after months of research by Russia's economists, was provided to the president. It then leaked, and it did paint a dire picture of where Russia's economy is heading. So the sanctions are hitting Russia, but the consensus amongst Russia's economists seems to be that the damage is likely to happen next year. So what they're talking about is, of the 2 of 3 scenarios presented in this document, is that the accelerating contraction is going to happen next year, that returning to pre-war levels of the economic situation is going to take a decade or more. The specific industries are pretty much all of Russia's main industries that will be affected: forestry, metals, mining, oil and gas exports. All of these will be affected. Now, there are obviously positive statements coming from officials about how the Middle East, Asia, Southeast Asia can try to make up for that. But there were some hard truths in this document about, for example, gas. While the president talks about new markets in the East, even in the medium term, we're talking 2040s, 2050s, it will take before those kind of gains can be realized. And in the meantime, it's likely recession isn't on the cards for Russia, and a particularly difficult one.
Thanks. That's Stuart Smith reporting live to us there from Moscow.